Yes, you can begin.
Right. So the four types of property tax that exist in our country at the moment. The first one is stamp duty, which is a transfer tax that is charged whenever a property changes hands. The technical word is conveying, when it's conveyed. Okay. And the stamp duty can be quite high if it's an upper level property. But below a certain threshold, I think at the moment the threshold is $850,000. There's no stamp duty. So it's not a tax that affects the more modest purchaser. The second type of tax, which almost nobody in Trinidad and Tobago knows about, is called capital gains tax. Because in our peculiar set of laws we have here, a capital gains tax will be arrived at where somebody has actually acquired something in the year 2010 for $1 million and sold it in the year 2015 for $2.5 million. They've gained $1.5 million without spending any money on improving it. Let's say like a piece of land. That's a capital gain. And in modern jurisdictions, the ones we aspire to, that is taxed. That is taxed separately. That's a separate tax. We have it in our law, but our law is peculiar in that if a transaction takes place over a year, more than a year, more than 365 days, the capital gains tax is zero. So in fact, most clever lawyers and tax advisors just ask people to wait a little bit. And you wait till the 13th month, and it's okay. You don't pay any capital gains tax. The third one, which is another one we almost never talk about, which is income tax on rental property. So we all know people who have rental property, whether it's family, whether it's friends. Some people in this meeting may even have rental property of their own. House in Tobago, some apartments in Barataria, you may be renting out property and earning income. And it's my experience being a seasoned practitioner here in Trinidad and Tobago, almost nobody declares that income, rental income, in their tax return and pays tax on it. So it's a sort of hidden stream of income that is not subjected to the microscope of the Board of Inland Revenue. And then we come to the topic of this evening's discussion, which is property tax. And property tax used to be known as house rates or land and building taxes. The house rates is nothing mysterious. They're almost calculated on almost the same basis. The difference is too minor to spend time in this seminar talking about it. The house rates refer to properties in the municipalities. There are 5 municipalities in Trinidad and Tobago: Port of Spain, Chaguanas, San Fernando, Arima, and Point Porter. Those are the 5 municipalities in Trinidad and Tobago. The rest of the country is covered in what they call county councils, and those people in the rest of the country pay what is called land and building taxes. What old time people used to call the land tax. That's land and building taxes when you have land in the country. And that is the summary of the property tax picture in the country. What is happening here is that under the late Patrick Manning, Prime Minister, back in 2008, the Finance Minister was Karen Nunes Teixeira. The proposal was advanced, and there were many starts and stops over the years. The proposal was advanced to review the property tax system. And there were several important things that were taking place in that review, and that's what we're going to discuss here. What was being reviewed, and what are the benefits and disbenefits of the system. One of the things that was being reviewed was what I just spoke about, the thing having 2 different names. So there was house rates and there was land and building taxes at a slightly different basis of valuation. Under the new system, once a property fit into a particular class, let's say it's residential or it's a factory, it was valued on the same basis, different numbers according to location, on the same basis, and all the taxes were just called one thing, property tax. So that's the first difference. The second difference was that the numbers were updated, because the numbers we were using in Trinidad and Tobago, let us be frank, were terribly outdated. So my office in Port of Spain, I think the property tax for our office was less than $1,000 a year. It might have been $840 a year. Okay? The property tax for the house in Woodbrook I used to live in was $48 a year. It was ridiculous. You couldn't buy anything with that. You can't even buy juice for 1 month with that. But that is what we were paying all the time, happy. and Mr. Manning wanted to change it. And of course, Mr. Manning had done other things, and there was a whole political furor. There was Axley tax, and there was all of that, and the People's Partnership came in power in May of 2010, and all that whole move to bring about a new taxation system never got put into place, although the law was passed by Manning. Okay, but there's a Property Tax Act of 2009. Now, it's interesting to consider what are the numbers. Let me get the next slide, please, Nigel. The next one along, thanks. Yeah. Right, we're there, yes. It's interesting to consider what are the numbers in terms of taxation and what are the meanings of the numbers. Under the old system, which was the land and building tax and the house rates, under the old system, at the end of 2009 is the last year taxes were paid in this country for property tax. At the end of 2009, the amount of money paid was 143 million TT. That was the amount of money actually received by the Treasury. Now, the current proposal, which was tabled by the Minister of Finance in the 2022 budget statement, is for us to collect $100 million this year. Of course, that statement was optimistic because that statement was made at the end of last year. We were still grappling with the COVID situation. And then there was a situation you all could remember when you're trying to have the forms filled out with the details about the property and whether enough forms had been filled out and they granted extensions of time and so. And the yardstick was that once more than half of the number of properties in the country had filed, they could proceed. And I think they've crossed the halfway mark. They have about another 23,000 forms to keep inputting, but they've crossed the halfway mark already. So we're going to have property tax, all else being equal. Now, the $100 million needs to be understood because the $100 million that I mentioned is to do with how Mr. Imbert is going to apply the tax, what Mr. Imbert is going to do, which I do not agree with. I'm going to say what I agree and what I don't agree with. I agree with the property tax. It needs to be reviewed. It's an important tax. But there are two big things I don't agree with. This is one of them. One of the things that the current administration is doing is that they are putting the property tax in place and they're starting with residential property. So in fact, in a manner of speaking, the person least able to afford. So you're leaving out manufacturing, you're leaving out warehouses, you're leaving out shops, you're leaving out restaurants, you're leaving out bars. We don't know when they're going to start, but we know that they're starting with houses. So that's the first point. So that's why the new figure, the estimate of revenue, that's what it's called in the budget. The document is called the estimate of revenue. The estimate of revenue for the country for the year 2022 was only 100 million because it's only residential. In my estimation, I mean, this is just an estimation. The residential component of the property tax total would be in the order of about 40 to 45%. Okay? I think more than half of the property tax money will come from factories and warehouses, yes? And businesses and shops and restaurants and bars and so on, yes? Gas stations and groceries and that kind of thing. But because they're only doing residential, which is about 40%, 100 million is what he said. So in fact, that kind of lines up with the early estimates under Mr. Manning, because Mr. Manning had not made this distinction Mr. Imbert made. Back in 2009, Manning and Nunes Teixeira were bringing in the whole property tax across the board on all classes of property. And at that time, it was supposed to be about 525 million. So you could rationalize it in some kind of way that the 100 million kind of makes sense that way. These are very, very crude estimates because even in the year 2022, because of the late delivery of all those forms, the implementation is not taking place as anticipated. So it wouldn't come out with the correct number. The other thing I want to discuss briefly, so that I don't want to get into a great amount of detail on it, is how is the property tax calculated? Because people have concerns about that. People are concerned, well, how is it calculated? How do we get these figures, you know? And I want to say that the property tax is calculated by reference to rental value. So we'll start off with a house, okay? And we'll talk about the fact that if you had a house that was worth, that had an estimated monthly rental value of about $3,500. We're just working with an example. The annual rental value is $42,000. So you could multiply 3,500 by 12 when you get 42,000. You make an allowance to have a reasonableness in evaluations of about 10% for what we call voids. And anybody who has owned property will know there are periods when you don't have a tenant. Sometimes it's longer, like during COVID. Sometimes it's shorter when it's a popular season. But on average, about 10% of the time you wouldn't earn any money. So you take off 10% and you get down to an annual taxable value of 37,800. And that 37,800 is taxed at 3%. 3% is the rate of tax on residential property under the property tax. And that's an annual tax liability of $1,134, which is a monthly sum of $94.50, which I guess is a little less than a cable bill or something, okay? That is what you would pay if you had a house or a home that was $3,500 a month in rental value. That's how that can be put in place. I will then now talk. Nigel, can I have the next slide, please? Yes. I will speak now to some of the frequently asked questions, what they call facts, on property tax, and try to address some of the main concerns or questions that people have. So one of the first concerns I have that people have said to me, and I've heard it in the media, it's not only me, you read what people are saying, you hear what they are saying, is that in fact, they look at it as a form of double taxation. They make the point that, well, hold on a second, this is unfair. I saved my money and I bought land. And I saved my money and I put up money and I went to the credit union or the mortgage company and I took a mortgage to build my house. And I bought materials and I paid a contractor and I paid a draftsman and I paid an engineer. And I paid for sand and gravel and cement and tiles and steel and my roof and my windows and my doors and my kitchen and my bedroom cupboards and my electrical and my fence. And on all of that I paid VAT because all of those materials are taxed. And then I have to turn around and pay a tax on something that I have done. In other words, on my investment. So there's a strong feeling. I've heard it said to me a few times that property tax is a form of double taxation. Now, that is simply untenable. Because if we use that way of approaching the question, you would have to pause and ask yourself the question, what about a business? If myself and Nigel went into business together, and we took our own money and bought buildings around Trinidad and Tobago to run our business, and bought uniforms for our staff and equipment, and advertised and marketed, and offered prizes and promotions and so on. We were on the radio, we were on TV. And we were paying our light bill and paying our water bill. And all of that investment has been made by us. Why should we pay any corporation tax? It doesn't make any sense. It's one of those arguments that is like a piece of desperation. It doesn't make any sense at all. Because by that reasoning, people who own a truck shouldn't pay taxes on the truck because, I mean, the truck, they paid for the truck, right? It doesn't make any sense. The next one is subjective basis of valuation, which is that people will say, well, hold on a minute. I live in this house with my family. We built this home, and this is our home. We've never rented it out. We've lived here for 20 years. And now you come along with this basis of valuation based on rental for property that was never rented. Where are you getting that figure from? It's highly subjective. And it's almost, if you wanted to be unkind, it's almost as if you could pull a figure from thin air and tax me on that figure. And again, that is interesting, but it's also untenable because those same people making those objections, when they go to a firm like our firm for valuation of their house, for insurance, or to go to the bank to take a fresh mortgage, yeah, or somebody in the family has died and there's a thing with probate, when they come for a normal valuation, the house isn't being rented then, and we're still able to do a valuation. They trust us to do a valuation. that this is the value of the capital value, this is the rental value, this is the insurance figure. And we have research to help us, to guide us along those things. It doesn't matter that that particular house was rented. That is a very literal view of the affair. There's a neighborhood, there are rents in the neighborhood, there are sales in the neighborhood, and that research guides our work, okay? The other point was about challenging an assessment. One of the interesting features of the property tax system that is being introduced here is its openness and its transparency, which is one of the reasons I'm very much in support of it. It is not written that way in the law, but the way the system will actually work is that if you live on a street and all the houses on that street at the beginning, there were like 30 houses on the street, they were like flat bungalows. And you have kept your place neat over the 20 years, but you haven't done any big set of improvements. And you get what is called an estimated assessment. So you get an estimated assessment that says how much your property tax is likely to be, is predicted to be. And let's say in the case of the house you occupy, it's $2,000 a year. You can actually go on the database, and there will have to be a database, and look and see what the other houses around by you are being charged. And if the house across the street from you was somebody who was done really well, they were working in the Middle East, they built the house up to 2 stories, they have a pool in the backyard. Okay? It's the best house on the street, and their figure is $2,000 too. Something is wrong. It's either your figure is really $1,000, or their figure should really be $4,000, but their figure and your figure can't be the same figure. Now, by means of people being able to see each other's assessments, by means of people being able to report assessments that they want to have queried, which is not their own. You could query your own assessment, but you can also report something else that looks out of line. And by means of the state having minimal involvement in inspections, you have two tremendous benefits. You have transparency, which means that even if somebody was trying to fix up the man across the street, as we say in Trinidad, to fix him up and to give him the same rate as everybody on the street, $2,000 a year, it's not going to work, because everybody's going to say this is ridiculous. He's supposed to be 4,000. But most interestingly, it's a system that is, in fact, to use computer language, it's crowdsourced. It's crowdsourced. Similar to when, I think about 5 to 7 years ago, we launched a program in Trinidad called Waze, a map program to drive around Trinidad and find places and so on. When Waze was launched, there was hardly any information on Waze. It was sketchy. But Waze is designed, there's no law, there's no requirement, there's no rule, there's no penalty. Waze is designed that if you know a better way to go from Coconut Drive to 6th Avenue Barataria at 6 o'clock in the evening, you could put it in. A better way to get there. And therefore, Waze, which is now a tremendous improvement, a really, really good product for finding a way around the country. Not perfect, but very, very good. The people at Waze didn't do that work. We did that work. So they put out a model. In drawing terms, you can call it a sketch, which was imperfect. And by the participation, the involvement, and the self-correction of the people who were invested in the system and engaged in the system, that database was perfected and refined. And that is how the property tax database will work. That is how it's a different level thinking altogether. Okay? The owner-occupied property, I'll move to the next point, the owner-occupied property, and I'll blend in the point about challenging an assessment. You may get some difficulties in owner-occupied property. Some people may not want to let the assessors in. Some people may not want to let somebody in to inspect their property. Some people may have an objection. But the way it works is like this. They have things in the law where they can actually go with police and go into a place and so on. But the person doing the assessment, which is the Commissioner of Valuations, might not want to do all that. The Commissioner of Valuations may just want to say, listen, you, the man living across the street, talking about him, the fictitious man with the houses twice as big. You write the person a letter. Because the way that it's going to work, entire blocks of property are going to be done by what is called mass valuation. Nobody's going to go out and measure every house in Trinidad and Tobago. That's not what's going to happen. A place like Trinidad, they will just take blocks, Bolio, Castleton, and do one price for the whole block. And let this process I'm describing refine the thing going forward. The crowdsourcing will refine it. But they will write to somebody who's sticking out like a sore thumb and say, right, we want to come to your place. Now that person could refuse. That person, I don't want you coming in my place. They have too much bandits. At which point, the person doing the assessments can put whatever figure they want. Because they have it on file and we wrote to this person, we wanted to come into the place, you didn't want to let us into the place. We can put a figure on your property. And if you appeal, because you still have the right to appeal, even the property owner who refused to let people into his place, if you appeal, you start off that appeal on the back foot. Because the court is going to say, well, hold on a minute. They asked to see your place. How are you complaining that they have the land area wrong, the building area wrong, and they have the number of bathrooms wrong, but you never let them into your place? You're not being reasonable. The court takes a very high view of reasonableness. So that is how that process will work its way through in terms of people wanting to be obstructive to the process. And lastly, on these FAQs, the whole question of whether property tax discourages investment. That bounces to the first question. The first question was one about double taxation and people having invested in their homes and finding themselves faced with a fresh round of taxes. And somebody could actually add a little bit to that argument and try to make the point that the property taxes, in fact, discourages investment. And I don't believe that is so. If you speak about the advanced countries where they have a modern, up-to-date property tax system, and you think about our country, those of you who visited those countries would realize what I'm talking about. You come in Trinidad and Tobago and you go along some of the main streets. You could be on Eastern Main Road. You could be on Frederick Street. You could be on some streets in Woodbrook, some streets in Vistabella, and see some broken down places covered in vines. On a main street that should be aesthetically and architecturally a showpiece for a country. Just broken down. Because there's some disagreement between family, between friends. Somebody in the back don't want to move out. The property tax is next to nothing, which is what it is in Trinidad and Tobago. It's $25 a month, $75 a month. It's next to nothing. And basically, people can spend their entire lifetime in court wrangling over it while the entire neighborhood is being dragged down. Jurisdictions that have a sharp level of property tax and it's well enforced don't have that problem. You wouldn't get a rundown property on Oxford Street in London, on Fifth Avenue in New York. You just wouldn't. From the time somebody starts a thing, they will fall behind the taxes, the city will take the property. And somebody who actually can afford it will buy it and improve it. That is how it is actually a trigger for development. It's not a discouragement to investment. It actually operates as a trigger for development. The next thing I want to talk about, Nigel, if you go to the next slide, the one with the graph. Yeah? See it there? Are we there yet?
Yes, we are seeing it, Afra.
Right. Well, what this graph does, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and take you through what is the meaning of the graph. So we can understand how the property tax figures can be interpreted and we put some sense to what is happening. I explained in the first slide that there are 5 municipalities in the country: Port of Spain, San Fernando, Chaguanas, Arima, and Point Fortin. And those 5 municipalities are the ones in which house rates are paid, yes? The rest of the country is where land and building taxes are paid. And that is non-municipal zones, what we call county councils. And what is remarkable here, when we go back to 1993 in this graph, is that we can see, and the numbers are interesting. I have the numbers in front of me. I'm not going to bore you with the numbers. We can see it. In 93, the house rates to begin with, let's talk about the house rates. The house rates are the kind of reddish line at the bottom. The house rates are on a steady rising upwards throughout the whole period. So that is not in question. The land and building taxes in 93 was 72 million. In 94, they were 109 million. In 95, they fell to 61. In 96, they were 59. In 97, they were 57. In 98, they were 56. In 98 to 99, they were 62. In 99 to 2000, they were 64. And in 2001, they were 59. And in 2002, they recovered and they went back to 94. And they continued to rise after that and so on. You'll see it in the graph. Now, the interesting thing about that, from my analysis, is that period from 95 going up to 2002, when there was that dramatic wedge of national income that disappeared, was when UNC was in power. I would say it. I'm not here to make a party political thing. I'm not party political, but it has to be said. It was never investigated. Nobody was ever arrested. Nobody was ever harassed for it. I tried to persuade people to follow it up, and nobody was interested in following it up. You didn't really go into the figures to get to this kind of vision of what it is took place in the country. Of course, the yellow line above is the total, and you can see the yellow line deflecting tremendously in that 7-year period. Okay, anybody running a business, you all MBA people, anybody running a business where income fell by half in a division within 1 year, you would have an urgent investigation to why that was and what was going on and so. But that never took place. So we just need to have that as context. And of course, I'll take questions and challenges and so on when we get to that point in the seminar. We need to have context as to what are the views about the taxation. And in my own understanding is that the numbers tell a story in terms of what the views are. The other point I want to make, Nigel, is some wider considerations on property tax before we close, okay? Because I know we have to leave room for colleagues to ask questions and challenge and us have a discussion with each other. And there are three issues I've put up here as wider considerations, okay? The first one is the question of local government finance. Under the old system, the system before up to the end of 2009, under the old system, the various bodies that were charging property tax, when you paid your property tax, it went to your local authority and it stayed with them. So in fact, when you paid your property tax in Port of Spain, it was a check to the Port of Spain City Corporation, Chaguanas with the Chaguanas Borough Council, and so on, okay? And in financial terms, that money stayed with the local authority. And I did extensive research into it. And for the money that local authorities spent at the end of 2009, roughly 16% of the money, 15.5 something percent of the money, came from property tax. So to some degree, there was a degree, I wouldn't call it autonomy, but a degree into which the local authorities were liberated from being totally dependent on the treasury, okay? Which is the whole dichotomy about central government and local government. The new system that Mr. Manning was bringing in was going to triple the amount of property tax because, as I said at the beginning, it's 143 million they were paying in that year 2009, and the amount they were supposed to be paying under Manning's estimate was 525 million. So it's about 3.5 times more money. Okay. But the thing I did not like what Mr. Manning did is that, in fact, he insisted that all that money would come back to what they call the consolidated fund. In his version of things, and the way the property tax law is written, we're making one tax now. We no longer have any land and building tax. We no longer have any house rates. We're making one tax now. It's called property tax. You pay it, and it goes into the treasury. The treasury will decide. So I think that is the second area I don't agree with. I said there were two big things I didn't agree with. The first one was doing residential first, and the second one is that this notion that the property tax should go all to the treasury, which in fact, as far as I'm concerned, is a step backwards. If you're talking about local government reform, you're talking about constitutional reform and putting power in the hands of the citizens, empowerment, this sort of language, governance, we talk about these things. It's a very backward step to centralize that power. So it really comes under the hand of the cabinet. And therefore, what is the point of voting for local council or councillors or something, local government elections? They don't have any power. What's the point of voting for them? So you're denuding this concept of any power. So that is something that I am very troubled by it. And I think it's something that we need to look at. If it is the current year is only 100 billion, it may seem a nominal amount, but when the whole engine starts rolling, it will be a significant amount of money, and it could offer a significant amount of autonomy or semi-autonomous behavior to local authorities. And that is something I think that we need to lobby for, if I just make a submission to the group here, okay? The second point is about betterment. And betterment is one of those concepts we discuss in our profession that goes like this. If you have a property and your property is acquired by the state, or part of your property is acquired by the state, and the piece that you keep has diminished in value because of what the part that was acquired is being used for. So they acquire half of your property to build a sewer treatment plant. So you kept half of your land. You were paid for half of the land that the state took. You kept half of your land, but your land is now right up on the sewer treatment plant. So it's not smelling that nice. So you could actually get a second set of money for the diminution in the value of the land you have retained. Conceptually, the other side of the coin is the debate about betterment. What about when the state, or the market for that matter, or a combination of both, operate over a period of time to cause an area to go up in value? So you get a better water supply in an area, yes? You get more regular lights in an area, better roads, pavements, and the whole area upgrades. They build a better school, they build a health center. The whole area is upgraded from how it was when you went to live there 20 years ago. There's no legal instrument in law, in our law, to extract betterment from citizens. Citizens simply enjoy betterment. So when you sell in your house, you will get more money for your house that you're selling now than if government had not done any of those things. And that is called betterment. The exact amount of it is not possible to compute, but property tax, as we have been discussing, offers an avenue for the recouping of some of that betterment. Because as the valuations are done over the years and things change, and so every 3 years you do a valuation, every 4 years, you'll be able to reflect the upgrade and have some of that return on investment return into the state. So that is the betterment concept. It's not a concept people talk about a lot in common life. It's a concept we use in our profession. And then the last one, which is the cherry on top of the cake, is what I call the missing millions. Because as I said to you at the beginning, there are people who have rental property, who have investment property, whether they are commercial investment properties or residential investment properties, who earn considerable income from it. Of course, there's a lot less now with COVID, but they earn considerable income from it. And almost none of those people pay income tax on it. what the property tax system is now forcing upon people, which is why there was so much of a protest and people were saying, don't follow the form, and there was all these protests, there were lawsuits, and it is forcing people. Because I don't know how many of you have actually done the return. I expect most people in the audience who would have had a property of their own or several properties under their control or their ownership, they would have done it. But the form is very detailed. You have to give your information. You have to give your national ID. You have to give a utility bill to say where you are. Then you have to give the deed for the property. You have to give the survey plan for the property. The building area for the property. If a portion is rented, what is that portion rented for? If another portion is rented, what is that portion rented for? So what is happening now? For the first time in a long, long time, the state is actually amassing details of who is renting what, which gives the state the possibility, if we return to the first slide, we're not going back there, but the first slide, the third item on the first slide was income tax on rental income. It gives the state the opportunity to have a bite of that mango. And in fact, to enhance the taxation prospects for the country on a class of people that simply have never paid taxes on it. And more to the point, even in terms of the nominal property tax in $94.50 we talked about, nobody's paid any property tax for 12 years. So we've all had a big holiday. I don't think there's any other class of business that has had 12 years tax-free. So it's time to get everything in order. I'm in support of it. I have my 2 criticisms. I'm going to pause here. I don't know whether everybody was getting audio. Nigel, I would pause here and I would open up the discussion when colleagues want to speak and make criticisms and so on, okay? Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Afra. Yes, I believe we haven't had any complaints with respect to audio, so I believe that the audience are hearing you loud and clear. Right. With respect to the participation at this juncture, you can type in your question in the chat box. You can send it to the panelists. So our moderator will see the chat and read it out for Afra and we can have the discussion. However, should you want to speak directly to Afra, you may want to raise your hand and we will acknowledge you. Unmute your microphone and you can speak. Try to keep your question very, very short so that we can have the dialogue taking place for the benefit of all on the line. So begin to type in your questions through the chat function and it will be read out. I am seeing one Mr. Paul. I'm going to unmute his microphone. I know his hand was up before, so I'm going to do so now. But I ask that after you speak, if you can lower your hand. And lowering your hand is just clicking the hand symbol again, so we will not come back to you in error. Okay, so if you want to speak, raise your hand. After you finish, lower your hand by clicking the hand symbol again. Hi, good evening, Mr. Paul.
You hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Yes,
Good evening.
we're hearing you, Mr. Paul.
Oh, yeah. Well, I agree with most of the issues raised by Afro. I support those things. I think that the question of property tax took too long to be implemented, you know, and it's very unfortunate, you know. Local government, you know, there are a lot of problems with local government, roads, drainage, and so on. And yes, those monies would have been very, very important for local government, you know. I filled up my my form very early, took it in when they were still on opposite Rosary on
Henley Street,
Henley Street here.
Yeah.
And they visited me with all their instruments and so on, and did all the inspections and so on, right? And you know, so I have fulfilled my responsibilities as a citizen. You know, I have a beef though on another taxation, you know, what is called value-added tax. You know, I think that is being abused by a lot of retail businesses, and you know, that is an issue we should go on to later on. So right. I agree with our first position, you know, and I support property tax. I think it's reasonable, you know, and it's taken too long to be implemented.
Like so many things, eh?
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, you can lower your hand by clicking the hand symbol again to give other persons an opportunity to ask questions. Afra, I'm seeing a question here. I'm just going to read it out for you. Why was a percentage needed to implement the collection of taxes if it is law? I remember you spoke about the threshold of crossing 50%. So the participant is asking is that why was that necessary?
I'm not seeing that question, but I will answer you. They need 50% to have an accurate basis to proceed with the mass valuation I was speaking about. I was alluding to a mass valuation process. Mr. Paul, who spoke a couple of minutes ago, Mr. Paul spoke about them coming to his house with the instruments and measuring and so on. As I explained when I was speaking, they're not going to be able to do that because there are too many properties in the country. The situation was so bad. So just to put the audience in tune in what I'm saying, the situation was so bad in 2009, 8, going into 9, going into 10, when we were talking about all of this 12, 13 years ago, that in fact, over half of the properties in the country weren't in any database. And these are big buildings and so on. They just weren't in any, people were able to build properties without even putting them in any database. So this new system, the one that we're speaking about in today's seminar, this new system was to capture all of those entries. And in fact, to give us a situation where we can get everybody on the books. But to get the system to work, which is what the questioner is asking, I'm still not seeing the question.
No, that question came directly to the presenter. You were not sitting.
To you, okay. Right.
Yeah, came to me directly.
What is happening? To get the system to work, by which I mean the system of mass valuation, you need to have a certain amount of information in the system. Mass valuation system can't work like in the Mr. Paul case, going to one house. You have to have thousands and thousands and thousands. And I think the number was 200 and something thousand. I forget the number, but it's time, but talk the number. It's a big number. It's like maybe 250 or 260,000 entries you have to have for the system to have enough fuel to start to turn. That is what that was about. There's somebody asking another question there, Colleen. You seen it, Nigel?
Yes, and I'll ask our moderator, my co-moderator, Erica Banfield. Are you seeing the question to read out for Mr. Raymond?
Yes, good. Colleen is saying that she was involved in another meeting and she would like Mr. Raymond to briefly recap the calculation of the property tax, please.
Sure. Let me do that now. What was happening there is that we had a situation where we have a house. I gave an example where we have a house that was had a rental value $3,500 a month, and you multiply that by 12 to get an annual rental value, and the answer to that sum is 42,000. You then make an allowance valuation for different things. You make an allowance for the fact that sometimes when you have a property, there are periods when you wouldn't get any money at all. Okay? Putting aside COVID, which is a truly exceptional thing, there are periods when you wouldn't get any money at all. And in fact, the allowance is 10% and they call it voids. So you deduct 10%. So the annual taxable value is 37,800. The property tax is levied at 3% on the annual property tax of the annual taxable value, I'm sorry. And in this case, that is $1,134, which is $94.50 a month. So that is a worked example for the person who asked the question, yeah?
Okay. Afra, there's a question that came directly to me as host.
Sure. Go ahead, yeah.
Good evening. What rate is the capital gains tax pegged at, and is there an estimate of how much revenue may be accrued from implementing same?
I think the capital gains tax thing is about 25%. I don't think there's any estimate, because what it is you're talking about, those sorts of estimates, I'm not aware of those estimates existing. I mean, I talk to colleagues who work in different ministries. I don't think there's any estimate existing on that. The amount of capital gains tax collected in the country is in fact tiny, because people kind of tiptoe around that 12-month rule, okay? So it's not even something that the authorities have put their attention on. I don't think the figure has been revised much, okay? We don't have much capital gains tax information. It was 250. Somebody saying, Colleen, yes, 250. Yeah. I'm seeing the chat. Yeah? I can see it on the side of my
you can
screen,
see some of the chat. I think there are other questions. Erica, you want to read out a couple other questions? And just to remind folks, if you wish to speak directly, please raise your hand and we will unmute your microphone. Erica?
Yes, there's no other, I'm not seeing any other questions after Colleen Holder.
Well, I think I'm seeing one here. The question is, so why it is taking so long to implement the property tax?
Pam, Baptiste.
Right, Pam, what was happening there, good evening. What was happening there was that we had 2 or 3 things happening at the same time. First of all, we had a period of 5 years and something when a party was in power that was hostile to the property tax, which was called the People's Partnership. They talked about it, they never did anything. To cut a long story short, they never did it. They had the flip side of Mr. They had the flip side of what Mr. Coleman is trying to do. They were actually trying to do factories and warehouses and malls and things first, and then to do houses last, residential last. And they got a serious fight back from the people who own those big properties. So they kind of let it slide. This current administration took power in 2015 September, as we know. And they were hit by 2 or 3 big lawsuits around the question of whether it was legal to require people to fill out the forms. They were able to make their way around that. There was another one about whether the whole thing was legal, whether it was constitutional. They were able to make their way around that. They worked their way through some litigation. And they finally got to the point now of creating a neat form and telling people, do the form. Get it done, get it done. And in fact, even the system that they had doing it was not best. It was a big improvement over what used to go on in the past. There was parts where you were able to do it online. So a lot of people, because it took place during COVID, so a lot of things they would not have normally done. They created a system online where you could have put most of your stuff online and done your filing online, which you could already do with your income tax. So it's now happening. Those are some of the explanations. I mean, I'm not inside the system. I'm one of the outsiders. So that's my understanding, Pam, of what was the delays, the cause of the delays, you know.
I have 2 questions that came directly to me, and then someone would like to ask a question. The first question,
go right ahead.
Hello, Afra. What about for persons who own land only? How would the tax be calculated with respect to rental value?
Well, it's the same thing. It's according to what the use of the land is. If it's land that could be used for industrial, because basically it's property. That's why it's called property tax. So if it's a piece of land that could be used for industrial, you will be taxed when the industrial properties come to be taxed. You won't be taxed now. Yes? If it's land that could be used to build a shopping center, you wouldn't be taxed now because they're not doing commercial and they're not doing residential now. They would calculate those things on those bases when it is time in the phasing for those things. If it's a piece of land that could be used for residential, you'd be liable to pay the tax now, and they would go through the same sort of calculation because there are ways to estimate what would be the rental value of a piece of land, because people do rent land for residential. It's a reality.
All right, another question from Ms. Inglefield. What is your thinking on how the property tax will be applied to lease lands fallen under the Land Tenants Act 1981 for the companies owning the land? How can a tax be imposed that is far greater than the rent charge, which is in itself totally out of touch with reality? It's a long question. Do you want me to repeat it?
No, it's fine. I understand the question perfectly. I mean, two points about it. First of all, it's a very involved question. And it's a kind of involved question I normally charge a fee to answer. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that really the property tax is going to be levied on what is your interest in the property. And that, again, that's an expert question. There are some situations like that left. I mean, you have Henderson, you have Aranguez, you have Guthrie, you have some of the old estates are left with rumps of property that is rented out to people who have houses on it. But those are very minimal situations. And I am sure that if you were to come with a well-articulated proposal to the taxation authority, you would be able to get a good negotiated settlement, just like people do for income tax and those things all the time. You know, it's not going to be unreasonable. I agree with you that there appears to be an anachronism in terms of the face of the calculations and what is the internal thing with the Land Tenants Act. But that is a little bit too involved for this seminar, respectfully, you know.
Okay, thank you, Afra. Erica, do you have any more questions?
Yes, from Lamore Joseph asked,
yes,
if the members of the public can still submit tax application forms, and is there a penalty for late submissions?
Right, I saw that question. Thanks, Erica. That answer to that question is yes. There is a gate, there's a portal where you can do it online. Okay, so there's a place you can plug into, just like doing anything online, and fill out all the information online. There is a penalty. I think the penalty is $5,000 for a late application, from what I could remember. And if I were advising Lem or Joseph, I'm not advising you, I'm just speaking in a seminar. If I was advising you, I would say, get your paperwork on file, get your WhatsApp bill, get your deed, get your survey plan, yeah, your billing area, your photo ID and thing, your utility bill to verify your own person, and make the application. Because the way that this place runs, and this is where the paradox kind of deepens, the way this place runs, I really don't know how many of those fines are actually going to collect or actually going to prosecute anybody. Is that the mask with the COVID, it was something that was killing people. And how many people actually pay the fines? We don't know. So make your application. If you run late, put your papers in and put yourself in good order. What you don't want is not to put the papers in, and the assessor comes along and makes an assessment that is unfavorable to you when you could have put your papers in. You know, that is putting yourself on the back foot. If you still have an opportunity to file your submission, you should file. That's my closing advice to you on that point.
There's another question, Afra, directly to me, so I'm going to read it out to you. If there is a capital gains tax, isn't owner-occupied property exempt as opposed to... So let me just find the question. I think I lost that.
Okay, the answer is that owner-occupied property, I don't see why it should be exempt. I don't know whether it is or isn't. As I explained a few minutes ago when I answered another question on capital gains tax, I think capital gains tax is one of those taxes that has changed very little, if at all, since independence. We haven't got a modern tax code. And the fact that something is owner-occupied should not exempt it from the attention of the revenue in terms of capital gains. Okay, I don't think it should. You know, because you're actually giving up a tremendous amount of money.
Right. After, let me read out the entire question to see if your position might change in terms of what you just mentioned. Ahead, if there is capital gains tax, isn't owner-occupied property exempt as opposed to investment/second property? Would your response be, your advice be different?
I keep it the same. I keep it the same. I answer the same. Yeah. I understand the question.
Yeah. Okay.
A question from Ms. Rhonda Lewis Hossain.
Right, okay.
My form was filled online 7 months ago. I received an email acknowledging the submission of the form. The email indicated I would receive a PIN number in a subsequent email, but I never got one. What is happening?
Well, I suggest you write them, because when last they spoke about this, which was about 2 months ago, perhaps it was 3 months ago, when the Minister of Finance announced that they hit the target, the number of the 250,000, yeah? He actually made an interesting revelation that surprised me. He actually said that, in fact, there was something like 23 or 24,000, maybe 25,000 forms still to be entered. So what surprised me was two things. What surprised me was, number one, I assumed, because so many people, it was possible to stay at home and fill out this form online, yes? And then press submit or enter. I thought it was going straight in a database. I didn't know if somebody had to now take it and still make data entry to punch it in, which is what was the implication of Mr. Embert's statement. And also, I was surprised that they were so far behind. So in fact, they could still be behind the person asking that question, I would go back and ask them, because they need to get a PIN number. PIN number is like a receipt. You actually need to have a PIN number. I quite agree with you. I got PIN numbers for all of mine. I made filings through our firm, and I got the email I got had a PIN number in it in all my cases. I'm not waiting for any PIN.
Simon saying that she wrote, but she never got her reply. So I'm not sure what would be her next step.
Persist. If you want, I'll give you names and things. Persist. You gotta write the top people and just harass them. Find out who the head of the department is and just tell them you need to get this thing. This is to put your papers in order. It's an important question. You're a citizen. You're a property owner.
Afra, given your level of expertise, and I know you responded to a question before, and you said, well, it's a very kind of touching question that you would normally, in terms of your profession, charge for that detailed service. And the person is very much interested in contacting you for a professional answer. So they will be in touch with you so that you can look out for that call and maybe many others on the line. Let me bring in a question from Mr. Dwight. Is that a question you would like to address the audience or to address you?
Yes.
You can speak, Dwight.
Hi, Afra. So I heard you say, this is about vacant land. I heard you say that there can be a taxable value assessed for vacant residential land. What about commercial land? Does that mean that there's no property tax paid on vacant commercial land? Or land
okay, let's talk about that. Sure. That's a good question, Dwight. So the answer about the residential vacant land is yes. Because what was said is that residential property is in the first phase of the same, but it's going to tax now. Yes? Commercial, industrial, retail, all of those other classes of property, agricultural, those classes of property, Dwight, are going to be brought into the stream later, at a later phase. So that's the answer to the question.
Okay.
I don't agree with it, but what the political administration has decided is that the first group of properties they're going to tackle are residential properties. I don't believe it's the correct thing, but that's what's happening.
Yeah, I asked the question because a lot of value could be held within vacant land, vacant commercial land, and therefore a good source of revenue could be wasted if the person decides, okay, I'm just going to sit on it for the next 5 or 10 years, waiting for the markets to go up.
Exactly. So it's not a very wise thing, but that's what the government is doing. They're the government, and I'm just a commentator. So they're doing what they do. I made myself clear. I don't think it's sensible, but it's what's happening. Mr. Manning was doing everything all at once, which I suppose is why he got the trouble he got.
After just a follow-up question, people buy 10 acres, 25 acres, 50 acres in Tamina, in Toko, maybe deep south. Yes. They're not really doing anything on it. It may be agricultural land, it may be freehold agriculture. Yes. What would be the implication for property tax on those properties?
Well, it depends on the class. If it's agricultural land, there's no property tax at the moment. But when agricultural land becomes liable for property tax, they will have to pay a tax on it. Yeah?
Although it is vacant and just maybe
yes, they'll have to pay a tax on it. Let me just work to the point, because there's a point that you're grasping at. Let me work to the point. It's just like the argument about owner-occupied property. This what you're discussing here with me is a version of that. So in fact, if a house on the street is occupied by a family and nobody's renting it, the argument goes, well, why should we pay a tax based on rental value? Because nobody's renting it. We bought this land and we built this house. But the fact is, because you bought the land and built the house and you don't pay anybody a rent, you are in fact enjoying, you have what is called beneficial occupation of the property. Yes? And that is taxable. And it's the same thing with the land. Even though the land may actually be vacant and you have no identifiable stream of income coming from the land. Yes, that 10-acre block somebody bought in the country. That land is actually an asset. It could form part of your assets. You could go to the credit union, Eastern, or Building and Loan, or Republic Bank and borrow money to do other things. So it is an asset, and therefore it falls to be taxed. That is my worked answer to you.
Thanks a lot for that.
regardless of the fact that there's no identifiable source of income, like month by month, that somebody's paying a rent on. It's an asset.
Thanks for that, Afra. There's another question from Ms. Jeffrey.
Yes.
How will squatting land be taxed when some of the persons do not have a reliable income?
Well, that's an interesting question. The whole question of unauthorized occupiers of land is a big question. How are they going to be taxed? I don't know. I mean, it's possible to calculate the valuations, so the property has a value. The properties have value. In a lot of the areas, you'd be surprised to know quality of services that they have in the areas. In terms of water and lights and roads, so it's not perfect. Some of them are in real need of improvement, but in fact, the properties have a value. Whether they tax people, because ultimately, as we've seen at different points in this discussion, ultimately, a big part of this discussion revolves around political questions. Because the land question, the land economics question, who has land, on what terms, how did they get the land, what do they do with the land, what will they be doing in 10 years' time with the land? Those are highly political questions. And of course, we live in a society where things get more and more politicized. So I don't know the answer to you whether they will enforce it. But by rights, in terms of what's happening with residential being the first class of property being taxed, I do believe by rights they have been looking at those properties. To answer your question.
There's a question. Oh, sorry. There's a question that came in directly. Will the property tax unit work along with town and country in instances of unapproved additional structures on residential land, for example, annexes and so on?
Well, they will work together because the general rule is that somebody shouldn't benefit from an illegality. Okay? General rule is somebody shouldn't benefit from an illegality. We have 2 or 3 things happening all at once where land and property and all of these things are concerned. We have the property tax, which is the subject of this seminar. We have the Planning and Facilitation of Development Act of 2014, which, like the procurement law, is yet to be implemented. They're supposed to implement a comprehensive planning system for the country. The National Planning Authority was appointed 2 weeks ago. The president is my successor as JCC president, Dr. James Armstrong. Okay, James is president of that. And then we have the procurement law. We have things coming together where, in fact, there ought to be, and I expect it to happen, there ought to be a revitalized emphasis in terms of what is approved development, what is not approved development, how it's enforced, yes? And what taxes are paid. You cannot make somebody pay a tax on something that, in fact, is an illegal structure. Having said that, that will then bring into force the teeth of the planning, what they call the PAFD, the Planning and Facilitation and Development Act, in terms of enforcement, making people tear down structures and so on. There's the passage of time, there's the enforcement action. That, again, that's a complicated one. Erica, that was your question, or did somebody put the question through you?
Yes, somebody put the question through me.
Okay.
Just a follow-up question, Afra, while we wait on some other responses. You mentioned that the government, through the Minister of Finance, is interested in implementing the property tax with respect to domestic. Now, there's a view that should you tax, I know it will have to be done at some point in time, but should you tax commercial properties, that you will see an increase in food prices, general prices, inflation will go up. What is your view on that?
I don't think so. The market is actually in a fairly desperate situation in terms of the economy generally. Things are not moving that quickly. Things are not moving that smoothly. And I don't think people have the scope to raise prices as they may have done in the past, because people just buy less and less. So we have the sort of things on social media, and we see the things that we all see. We all be to the shops to buy food, and so we see the prices of things have gone up and so on. But I also see that people buy less and less, myself included. People buy less and less. As the prices go up, you can only afford to spend so much money. So there's limits to these things. I don't think it's like how it was 15 years ago when we were in that terrific boom between sort of 2000 to 2010. when you could have just added on any price and people were paying it, whether it was a car, an apartment, and so on. We're out of that period now. So my answer is no, I don't think it will have that sort of impact. Maybe marginally, but nothing serious.
Okay, so just remind folks that you can type in your questions to the panelists via the chat function, or there's also a Q&A button. But should you wish to speak directly to the expert, Afra Raymond, you can raise your hand and we will allow you to speak directly to him. Okay. Afra, you also mentioned that in terms of fiscal 2022,
yes,
the government had estimated, I think, 100 million with respect to the collection of property tax on domestic properties.
Correct.
But of course, that has not been implemented. The fiscal 22 will end by the end of September.
Correct.
That shortfall, do you see that the shortfall of the 100 million will impact government expenditure, or was it cushioned by the increase in oil revenues?
No, I think the increase in energy revenues would easily offset that. The whole point of the property tax thing is to start. And they've made a start. They encourage people to fill the forms out. The forms have been filled out. Enough forms for them to kickstart the system, to prime the system. And we're going into 2023, fiscal 2023, very shortly. As you said, I think it's about 2 months from now or something, 2.5 months or something. We're going into there very shortly. And when that happens, we need to just bring other classes of property in and get the thing rolling. Because as I said, up to 2009, half the properties in the country weren't in any database where tax was concerned. And we are now at the position where we can actually say, hey, we've got about 55% of their money database. And that's a very strong place to start from, you know?
Okay. I know from a national perspective, there's also a view in terms of maybe I can say third world countries such as Trinidad or developing countries, in terms of continuity of policy. You find that this government has pointed out that they're going to implement the property tax. Should there be a change in government, I think at the next election, I think it's 24, 25, do you envisage a change in policy or modification of the property tax regime?
I think we should brace for that. I think we could expect that sort of thing. We could expect that this sort of erratic, unreasonable behavior, which is across the board, would manifest itself again, particularly where property tax is concerned. You know, if they can find a way to remove themselves from a situation where their dealings are observed, that is property owners and so on, they would do so. And that is the beauty in this system. You see, there are some things, it's interesting, and there are some things that are, it's kind of hard to turn back the hands of time. Once you create that open database, and people can go in there and look at things, just the way data works. I won't talk everything here, but the way data works and the way these systems work. Once you open that portal, and people start to go in there and look, it's not going to be possible to touch, reset, and go back to zero. There are some things it's just not possible to reverse the course of time. And that is one of the things. So we have to work for that, you know?
Okay. There's another question that came directly to the host. Sure. Will the property tax be tied into inland revenue so that personal tax and property tax can be offset against each other?
Well, no, there's no question of any offset. They'll be streamlined. So that if you have a property tax filing that says you have 6 apartments below your house, you have to pay income tax on those too. They'll be streamlined. It wouldn't reduce your tax, it'll increase your tax, which is how it should be. Because you should be paying income tax on your income, all your income, unless a specific exemption is granted for a specific purpose. So, for example, there are certain exemptions to assist the poorer class of person. I think it's $7,000 or $6,000 a month, yeah? That below that they don't pay any tax and so on. But unless there's a specific exemption granted by the parliament, you shouldn't be having income that is tax-free. To me, that is a form of piracy, yeah? That is like people locking your neck and robbing you and so on and so on. Yeah, you know? The answer is yes, yeah. Okay? I'm just answering a question here.
So as we wind down, folks, feel free to get in your questions. I know that it's an issue that will impact all of us because want to assume that most of us have property or properties or connected to people who have properties, so that there should be a level of concern in terms of how we manage ourselves and by extension our country accordingly. Again, if you want to speak directly to Afra in terms of this advantageous opportunity, you can do so now by raising your hand, and we will unmute your microphone so you can address Afra directly. I'm seeing another question. Sorry, go ahead, Erica.
Oh, sorry. There was a question that came directly as well. What about landlords and their registration with the relevant authority? Will this be a part of the process eventually to ensure landlord compliances apart from taxes?
Well, you see, this is where it's interesting. When the previous administration was in power, I can remember approaching, at that time we had, the last census we had in this country, the most recent census we had in this country was in 2011. Okay? And the census, of course, they go door to door. So every household, they knock on the door and so on. And I can remember lobbying Mr. Dukaran, the Minister of Finance at that time, with whom I was very friendly, and Ms. Mary King, who was the Minister of Planning, because the census, the CSO is under planning. Okay? And I can remember lobbying both of them and saying to both of them, this is a golden opportunity to get all the information on rental property. You just have to ask the tenants, who's your landlord? How much do you pay? What is the person's name? What's the person's phone number? What's the person's address? There's no tenant who's going to lie to protect their landlord. They will sell out their landlords. We can get all the information and do it right there in the census, which everybody is going to answer questions for. So we need to find a way to capture that information. Otherwise, this huge flow of income is going to be passing in front of our eyes untaxed. While the rest of us who are trapped in normal occupations like myself and so on, we have to pay taxes on our income. Okay, it's not fair. Some people can see it as encouraging entrepreneurship, but it's just encouraging slackness, because you wouldn't go in other countries and do that. You would do it home, though. You know? Pay your part. You know? That's it.
There's another question. Now that the 50% mark has been achieved, is the database of other properties in my area available?
Not yet. Okay, the answer is not yet. Because what they have to do, they're trying to bring, which is, remember we spoke just now about the 25,000 forms that they still have to complete inputting that information.
Yes.
When they do that, then they'll be able to start to look at peculiarities. So you may get a street, we talked about this fictitious street with 30 houses that were the same. And you may get 20 people have filed that their house is 2,000 square feet, and one person will file that his house is 900 square feet. And you will say, well, hold on, I know that street. How could one house on that street be 900 square feet? They all are 2,000 square feet. I had a brother-in-law living there. So he will pull that one and say, I want to inspect that one. And that is the process of internal refinement. And then the database is published. And then you have the process of public refinement, which we called crowdsourcing. When the public back and forth, they correct this thing, when no, he really have 2 stories. When no, he has a pool in the front. He have a brick wall all the way around his house, and he's just getting better and better information coming in. And people have the chance to correct wrong information about their own house as well. Okay? So that's the answer. We're not ready yet. We'll be there soon.
I just want to follow up. I'm not too sure if you did address it, but I remember that you said that the late Prime Minister, Mr. Manning, in the 2009 implementation, was that the property tax would come back to the consolidated fund. And I know as a professional, you had an issue with that. Now, with the present structure as it is, that will be implemented shortly, is it that the collection of taxes, property tax, now will go to the consolidated fund, or would it remain with the regional corporations?
Well, it is still very ambiguous. I think at the moment, it is still the consolidated fund. I think it needs to be very, very clear that it stays with the local authorities. It's quite ambiguous, and I'm not happy with that. Those are taxes that in other parts of the world, just to give you all an example, in other parts of the world, almost all the municipal salaries are paid by property tax. So it is in their interest, the people in that city, people working in that city, to make sure every scrap of property tax is identified and collected. So if you, Nigel, putting up a two-room extension at the back of your house, and somebody in the building works department approve your plans, he don't tell his partner in the property tax section. He's not waiting for you to follow the form, you know. He don't tell his partner there. And the electricity company come in to check the wiring for the new flat you put in the back of your house. They don't tell. Everybody wants to collect that tax, but that's how they get their salary. Here in Trinidad, because there's a disconnect, yes, between performance and pay, between how the local authority identifies and collects the taxes and how they collect their own salary, because the state is paying all of it. We have this kind of breakdown. We need to bring more and more of that money onto the table locally to enhance the standard of performance of the public sector at the local authority level. That's my...
Right. There's a person would like to ask a question. Ms. J. Janelle Ahe. Hi, good evening, Janelle.
Good evening.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good evening.
I would like to ask two questions, actually. One, there are a lot of people who are squatting and they have built houses. Some started off with board houses and some, of course, has refurbished that into proper concrete structures. How do you think that would be addressed, seeing that it's not their land, but the house is theirs, because they would have purchased the materials and stuff to build that house on the structure? That's one.
Well, in fact, there is a way to do it. The answer is, to answer your question just in order, there is a way to do that. And they could work out a value for that, okay? To answer the question, yes, they could.
So they will be paid.
And ostensibly, they ought to. Whether they did it or not,
right.
It's something we wait to see when it comes out. We get the details later a little bit down the road, yeah? But when Dr. Rowley said, not Rowley, already when Imber said residential property, of course that would include what you're talking about.
Okay. Number two.
Yes. What's the second one?
Second question is, in a residential area, you have your home, but you then went something connected to what Mr. Nigel was just talking about, and you build a building to the back of it, but you were stopped by Town and Country because based on the area, it wasn't approved or so forth. But the building is already built behind, but there's no running water or lights, or nobody's utilizing it.
Yeah.
How would that be now taxed? Would it be taxed independent, separately, apart from the house, or as one, although it's not adjoined to it?
Well, if I was doing that case, I mean, that's a very detailed question, but let me answer it this way. If I was doing that case, and by doing that case, I mean, if I was representing you as the property owner who had that situation, so you have a house in the neighborhood, and you're putting an extension in the back to do something that was non-residential, you didn't have permission, you put up the walls and the roof already, and they stop you. So you never put lights and water in it, you never put on a flooring or a ceiling, but you have the four walls up. If I was representing you in that taxation situation, I would say that in fact, if we're paying extra for that, it will have to be a de minimis amount, because the fact is that the client has the convenience that we can, if they got permission retrospectively, they could put in water and lights and finish the space and have a little flat at the back, or a seamstress shop or whatever at the back. But at the moment, it's not usable. So it's not. That's how I would take it in an argument. Other professionals may have a different view.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Folks, we are really above our time. I know that we respect Mr. Raymond's time as well, but I know that is a very interesting topic. So I will take two more questions. I'm seeing Mr. Saunders is on the line, and then I will read a question from the chat. Adrian, can you speak?
Yeah, President, good night. Concerning what the lady was bringing up there are laws, I believe, that you cannot have two buildings on the same compound separate. There's some issue that if the roofs are not attached, okay, you are breaking the law there. So she was speaking of another building. If the roofs are not attached as joint, that is breaking a law, I think.
I don't know if that is so. It depends on the size of the parcel and if it's a leasehold scheme, What are the rules of the leasehold scheme and so on. Yeah, what I'm saying is it depends. There's a wide range of things that can happen. So it's not a simple question.
I know of someone in my area who,
answer,
who lost a court matter involving that. You know.
Yeah. It's according to the background, it's rooted in the land title and the planning status and so on.
Okay.
Let's get in one more question. How will persons with mixed property be taxed, commercial and residential, on the same property or dwelling? And there's a follow-up question. If you're on a long-term lease, who will be taxed?
Okay. The commercial and residential, they will have to deal with the residential part. The long-term lease, I'm not sure what you mean. Let me tell you why I say that. Properties in Sinclair, or big parts of Trinity, are long-term leases. They're 99-year leases. When you buy a property in Trinity, most of those properties in Trinity there, the whole of Woodbrook is 30 years with 30 permission to renew for further 30 years. Trinity is 99-year leases and so on. Someone who buys a property in Trinity, whether it's Bolio or Castleton or whatever, Cane Farm, it's a lease that they're buying. And they pay a mortgage to the bank, TTMF or TBLA or whoever. They own that house, subject to the mortgage. So they have to pay property tax on it. So I'm not sure what is the long lease we're talking about. I said the whole of Woodbrook is 30-year plus 30-year leases. Major parts of the country in terms of development are residential long-term leases. So those property owners, the people who own the beneficial interest in the property, they are the ones who will have to pay the property tax, not the person who owns the freehold and collects $1 a year for 99 years. That's just a nominal thing. You as the occupant of the property who's bought the property would be paying the property tax.
Thank you very much, Afra, for that. Well, those responses, I think, well researched and, of course, eloquently dealt with respect to the information provided. But, of course, like everything, every good thing, we have to come to an end. And I know that it was very, very beneficial to me, and I'm quite certain our alumni body and by extension all our guests on the line this evening. So I would like to invite the chair of our events committee, Ms. Erica Banfield Moore, and after her vote of thanks, I would like people to just stay on for just about 2 minutes or so. We will run a video of Mr. Pierre's firm, Raymond and Pierre. I think it's very instrumental that you see this video. It's only about 30 seconds long, so you can be aware of the services that it offers. I just, want to crave your indulgence to hang on for just a couple of minutes, or maybe a minute after the vote of thanks. So, Erica, would you do the honors?
Says starting strong is good, but finishing strong is epic. And indeed, we did have an epic finish. First, I would like to thank God for all of us being present here tonight. And we at HAAC values and understands the importance of continuous learning. And we are committed to building capacity among our alumni community. And as such, these sessions are made possible only by the generous contributions and support from various groups, organizations, and professionals. A heartfelt thank you to our esteemed Mr. Afra Raymond for delivering such a sterling contribution on property tax. As usual, he delivered with excellence and professionalism. Thank you to our chairman, Mr. Nigel Matthews, the events committee team, our moderator, and more importantly, you, our audience, who made it all possible. After your views on the matter of property tax proved to be quite insightful and thought-provoking. We particularly liked your views concerning the double taxation and the difference between the old regime and the new regime. I, for myself, found out as opposed to the funds will now be sent to the treasury as opposed to being to stay in the local government, and which allows greater autonomy for the local government, which is great. It is also very interesting to understand how the property tax is actually being calculated. I'm sure that most of us would have gained a lot of insight with this aspect as well of the program. And we do appreciate your views in terms of property tax not being something that will deter investment, but it's supposed to actually trigger development. And if we are all interested in our country going forward and doing well, this is something that we should really appreciate. And again, on behalf of our guests and HAAC, we say thank you very much. For those of you who had all those questions, Mr. Pierce, you all can visit raymondpierre.com. And we also have, you can follow him on his blog. There's a free book he has on, that is on his blog. So you all can visit there for further information as well. So again, I would like to say thank you very much.